Day of spring. And we are returning to X100 and activating the housing. We worked on this and brought forward a committee amendment. Subsequent to that, through additional conversation, it seems to some members of the committee, including myself, that we could make some modest changes that would enhance our work further. So I've worked with council to have a short amendment for our consideration, and everyone should have a copy of that. And
where would I find it?
Well, I put it on your desk on Friday.
Oh, we'll forget it.
You want to share? We can share.
And it's also posted.
No, I'll use it. Thank you.
Is that correct?
I was just checking.
All right, so we'll check. All right, so if it's not posted yet, it will be posted shortly. So, council, if you could introduce that draft by draft number, timestamp, date, all the rest, so everyone will know eventually if they have the right version. We could just walk through it, please.
Sure. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. This morning we are talking about an amendment to S100 on March 15th. Last week, your committee voted out an amendment to S100. That amendment is dated March 15th. It is draft 3.1. And you will probably need to look at it as I introduce the new amendment as well, because the Gray amendment, which is dated 3/16, draft 1.1, which is posted on your website today, amends your committee amendment. So because you no longer have possession of the bill, your committee can't amend it further, but so what we're going to look at today is an individual amendment. Additional sponsors can be added to that amendment should you like.
So my hope is people will decide for themselves, but to the closest we can get to having it be a committee amendment is to have 5 of us or however many sign on as individual senators. So, but to get the ball rolling, it has my name on it for the moment. Thank you. Senator.
Thank you, Chair Bray. Just one question as we dive into this. I've also heard that there's an amendment from Senator Chittenden that is trying to get something along these lines as well. I don't know, maybe.
I have yet to hear
Okay,
it or see it.
okay. There we go. That's
Okay, thank you. Depending on what that amendment is, I guess we'll see it in this committee. Amendments for state planning law, and we should have them in and see it.
Okay. So the amendment today is so the Bray amendment is just 3 instances of amendment. So on page 1 of the amendment, the first instance of amendment is amending section 16, which is the Act 250 section. So if you're looking at the 3.1 draft that your committee voted out, this is going to be amending the language on page 5. And it is inserting oh yeah, so this draft hasn't been edited. There's already a typo in the first instance. So it is inserting the words designated neighborhood development area. So I will correct the lack of underlining under the word designated and fix the comma. But so what it's doing here practically is adding to section 3D3, which is on page 5 of your committee amendment. It's adding NDAs to this, which is lifting the caps on priority housing projects. So the language your committee passed was the sunset, so which is exempting the construction of priority housing projects located entirely within a downtown or a growth center until July 1, 2026. This is adding designated neighborhood development areas, and I will make sure that it reads that correctly, but it's functionally lifting the caps on priority housing projects in these 3 designated areas until 2026.
Thank you. So my recollection, sort of how we got here, is we looked at NDAs, moved on, addressed creating the enhanced village center designation, spelled out criteria that are related to what makes one enhanced, but did not bring sort of comparable language back to the NDA section. So NDAs, and there's a second qualification that goes along with it. But the whole idea was for the most planned and the most planned areas that are designed for density, housing density, that all 3 types should be included. So we'll talk about the additional language that goes along with. It's not just adding NDAs alone, it's NDAs as further specified. And could you just remind the committee a little bit about the relationship between NDAs and growth centers or designated downtowns?
Sure. So under the designated area program, there are 5 designations currently, although your bill would be adding a 6th. And 7th technically. Currently under the system, there are 3 core designations: the downtown development districts, the new town centers, and village centers. Additionally, when a town has one of those core designations, they can then add an overlay designation, which is either the neighborhood development area and or the growth center. And so those areas encompass the core designation within, but they are a larger geographic area than the core designations.
Great, thank you. So again, the core designation is a bit of an anchor and a proxy for testament the level of planning capacity by that town, and then this adds on the NDA that as being eligible for unlimited development of priority housing projects, with the caveat that's to come in the next instance of amendment.
Yes. So the second instance of amendment amends section 17. And so if you are looking at the language that your committee passed, it'll be on page 8. So this is the draft 3.1 document. And it's adding new language to subsection 2B. And this is the section regarding the creation of the enhanced village centers. And so 2B is part of the list of requirements that a village center must have in order to achieve the enhanced designation. And so in the language that your committee passed, in order to achieve enhanced designation, a village center had to have permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws, municipal sewer and water, and then adequate staff. The Bray amendment in the second instance of amendment is adding additional requirements, and so or changing it slightly so that it would read: a village center must have at least one of the following: municipal sewer infrastructure, a community or alternative wastewater system approved by the Agency of Natural Resources, or a public community water system. And so it's at least one of the following. Do you want to stop there?
Sure. So I think, in talking with some people after, and we talked about it a little bit in committee and then following it after, that it specifies, the idea was that we had infrastructure there to support the house, right? No debate. I didn't hear any debate about that. What I heard was maybe this was too narrowly written in our current amendment: municipal sewer and water infrastructure. So in looking at other language in the title, there's more latitude given as how you satisfy that requirement, and that's the language that council has crafted there, lines 9 through 11 of the amendment. Any questions on that?
And so you will see in the third instance of amendment, nearly identical language is being added. And so the third instance of amendment is adding an entirely new section right after this section. And it is amending 24 VSA 2793E, which is the statute that establishes the requirements for a neighborhood development area. And I will read you the language, which is at the bottom of page 1 of the Bray amendment. So the neighborhood development area is served by at least one of the following. So this is adding a requirement to what a town must have a neighborhood development area. Municipal sewer infrastructure, a community or alternative wastewater system approved by the Agency of Natural Resources, or a public community water system. And so this is adding identical language to what is just being added in the enhanced village center designation language. I do want to point out that last year in S226, this language is nearly identical to the language that was previously in this statute, but that was removed in last year's S226. So until last year, neighborhood development areas were required to have sewer, municipal sewer, or a community or alternative wastewater system. Last year, S226 removed that requirement, and so this would be putting it back in, but adding the slightly flexible language of at least one of the following.
So again, it's for these areas to which we're enabling unlimited development priority housing projects. One of the arguments for which was that towns have already invested in creating them, there's infrastructure, et cetera. We have this virtually identical requirement for enhanced village centers, and now we're truing up NDAs to match. And that's it. Significant, but sort of narrow and technical. So any questions, comments, etc. And I have shared these with economic development just so that they're aware that we're considering this, as well as with Commissioner Hanford and others. Because it's a very sensitive topic. Everyone wants to know what's going to be allowed.
Thank you, Chair Bray. I'm supportive of this amendment as it reads and would be happy to sign on as a co-sponsor if that's the right terminology.
Sure.
We got a lot of feedback about the changes that were made in our committee, at least I did, from constituents over the time since we passed it out. And one of the concerns that I heard loud and clear was that the rural parts of our state would be less able to use some of the changes that we made. And that was a very compelling point to me. So if I'm understanding this amendment correctly, that would add a little bit, or opening it up a little bit further, and particularly to like those suburban areas. I'm wondering if you have an understanding of how many more, we had like 41 miles was the number we heard for places within the state that we could, yes, 40, maybe square miles, yes. Do you know how much more this would open it up?
So 41 square miles is the total number of designated areas.
Okay.
What you have in this bill is a more limited subset.
Yes.
So it's less than 41 square miles. The addition of neighborhood development areas would add, the 12 towns currently have neighborhood development areas.
Okay, thank you.
And for the rural folks, so the second instance of amendment is not that easy to see where it's inserting right here. But that's more, I would say, more flexible language that inserts into the enhanced village center piece that the committee brought forward specifically to address what you were saying.
Yeah.
Since we have 200 plus village centers, this will allow the 200 plus village centers, well, we already allowed in the prior version of them to apply to become enhanced village centers. The language there, I think, was maybe a little too narrow. And so the proposal here is to provide latitude, for instance, like this phrase here, community or alternative wastewater system approved by the Agency of Natural Resources. So
Right. Okay.
that sort of option.
Thank you.
Senator Watson.
Thank you. A question about that. Do we know if So I'm also glad to see this opened up a little bit. Do we know how much it will open it up? Like, is this going to cover most?
Square miles?
Well, sure, square miles, or like how many village centers might qualify for?
So I think there are over 200 currently. Is that correct?
So yes, the 12 refers to neighborhood development areas. There are more than 200 village centers. I don't know how many currently would meet the definition.
So there is, I mean, when we went to village centers and created enhanced village centers,
Mhm.
we did ask people to, in order to bring, I think, I would just say it this way, a certain level of rigor and planning and orderly development to it, we had 3 conditions. A was duly adopted permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws. B was municipal sewer and water infrastructure, which is, here we're amending that B to be a little broader or offer alternative if approved by A&R language. And then C is adequate staff, municipal staff to support coordinated, comprehensive, and capital planning, development review, and zoning administration. So it wasn't, the goal was, as I would characterize what we're after, was, well, we're opening village centers up, but we are expecting them to make that kind of planning and infrastructure investment.
Thanks.
How many of the 200 plus will decide to become enhanced? I don't know.
Yeah.
Some might already qualify.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Other committee questions, discussions? So for sponsors, Senator White, we would like to be on the amendment, correct? Anyone else? like to-
Sure, I'll jump on.
Okay. Watson, Senator McCormick, or Senator McDonald?
I think I'll pass.
Okay. Rules. We might feel, what is it, an enhancement for someone giving, like, you could go either way, no pressure, just your choice. I think it's a great idea. So let's take off.
Give me a few minutes
Okay,
before lunch.
all right.
And on second, I mean, I did vote for the bill. I don't like the bill, and it's a housing bill, and it's gonna go forward and hopefully be approved. I'll be a co-sponsor.
That will correspond with our original tweet,
So I need to fix this amendment.
or no, maybe it actually doesn't. You need to fix the amendment, correct? Okay, right, there's a
Yeah, there's a typo.
a little hiccup, okay. So what will just so that we can do our vote now, so we can report out to economic development today, what draft number will you assign to the next draft?
It'll be 2.1.
2.1, okay. So the chair would be looking for a motion to amend the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy with a further proposal of amendment, draft 2.1 dated today.
So
Anything else?
I don't think that's the
Are we
motion.
not amending our
You're not
reports,
amending your report.
offering it as a separate amendment?
Yes, it will be a standalone floor amendment.
Okay,
It would be proper for you to take it does impact your amendment, so it would be proper to take a straw poll on impacting your amendment. I don't know if you need to vote because it's an individual floor amendment.
I'm sure.
Your vote is signified by who
Right.
joins the co-sponsor.
Thank you. So I'm gonna unwind all that and just say that, so let's take this. This is like looking at any other amendment that applies to our work brought to the floor. So that I can report what the committee position was. Then I would do the straw poll. Thank you, council. So all those in favor of supporting this amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Sort of.
Was that a sound?
I said I sort of. Aye.
All right, so, and Senator McDonald, you are a yay or a nay?
Yeah, I support.
Yeah, okay, so we have 500 support for the amendment, and it'll be 2.1. And when you have it, I'll bring it to the secretary and we'll see it on the calendar. And I will let economic development know.
Right, and so currently the bill's still in appropriations.
Yeah.
I don't think they have taken it up yet, so you have time.
Right, yeah,
It will probably not be on the floor until next week.
okay.
So if you need to slow walk to the, you don't have to run, sorry, this is just unusual because normally we're running to the
Yeah.
secretary's office.
Yeah. I appreciate the non-running.
So I gotta do
uh,
that. Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, thanks,
all right.
Ellen.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for the further tuning for the language. Okay, when you have it, I'll walk it up, front it up. Thanks, everybody.
You'll-
Okay, so change of topic entirely. So we had, because we lost time, before was longer than I ever imagined. So we will reschedule our committee discussion on bills and priorities, and we are a little bit under the gun to be responsive this week on S115, actually miscellaneous agricultural subjects. We have Mr. O'Grady here.
He was, I don't know where he was. It's just in the hallway, I believe.
Thank you. There are, in this bill, which is currently in finance, there are two sections, sections 8 and 9, which the chair of finance asked this committee to look at because they're policy areas that she felt were inappropriate for the finance committee to weigh in on and resolve. Because there's a bigger question than simply monetary impacts. Okay, so with that, Mr. Grady, if you could join us at the table and help this committee come up to speed on S115 and in particular sections 8 and 9.
Sure.
Thank you.
Do you want me to put, I have a PowerPoint presentation, so just a few slides. It looks like you all have hard
Yes.
copies in front of you, so I won't put it on the screen.
Okay.
And it's
thank you.
posted.
Okay, great, thank you. So this is Michael Graves, Legislative Counsel. Before diving into the specific language that is in S115, I want to give you some context for why the request was made by the Agency of Agriculture, what the statute says. There is some potential ambiguity, and then basically what the language is intended to address. So municipalities do have the ability to regulate stormwater. And the primary authority for that, the most clear authority for that is in 24 VSA 4414, where it authorizes a municipality to adopt a bylaw for the regulation of stormwater management and control. And any municipality may implement stormwater management and control consistent with the program developed by A&R under 10 VSA 1264. So remember that, consistent with A&R's authority under 10 VSA 1264. But before you get to 10 VSA 1264, you have to realize that municipal bylaw authority is limited. There's limitations on municipal bylaw authority, and it applies to all municipal bylaws, those limitations. So 24 VSA 4413 has limitations on municipal bylaws, including on the stormwater bylaw authority. And so that limitation section includes a limitation on agriculture, specifically 24 VSA 4413 D1 says municipal bylaw shall not regulate required agricultural practices. So that stormwater bylaw is limited by 4413 and the prohibition on that municipal bylaw regulating required agricultural practices. Now, what are required agricultural practices? What do they regulate? In finance, you heard testimony from advocates of municipalities saying that RAPs regulate point sources. No, that's just the exact opposite. The RAPs do not regulate point sources. The RAPs regulate non-point source pollution. And that is very clear from both the statute and from the RAPs that they are intended to regulate agricultural non-point source pollution. They're not a point source mechanism. They are not a point source permit. They regulate non-point source pollution. And that's important because what is non-point source pollution? It's stormwater. And when you go to EPA, and the EPA defines what a non-point source pollution is, they'll tell you it's stormwater. So look at the logic chain then. Municipalities can regulate stormwater, but they're limited from regulating the required agricultural practices. The required agricultural practices are agricultural stormwater requirements. So municipalities cannot regulate agricultural stormwater. That is the logic chain. But municipalities do regulate agricultural stormwater right now. In multiple towns, municipalities, under their stormwater authority, whether it be utility or otherwise, are assessing fees on farms. Colchester was an $1,800 annual fee. In Shelburne, it was a $600 annual fee. In multiple St. Albans towns, it's been well over $1,000. And by the way, that's in addition to the fees that these farms are paying for their agricultural water quality permits, for their permits that are already regulating agricultural stormwater. So, and it's,
Sorry, those last fees are part of the RAPs or who?
so it's part of the agricultural water quality chapter. So the RAPs are the floor of ag water quality, but then if you're a medium farm, more than 200 or more and less than 699 cows, you pay the MFO permit, and that's $1,500 a year. If you're over 700 or over, you're a large farm, you pay the large farm permit fee, which is $2,500 a year.
Okay. And that fee, is it oriented to managing stormwater period, not only like on the farm itself?
It goes into the Ag Water Quality Assistance Fund,
Okay,
which is used largely to pay the cost of the agency employees that do ag water quality regulation and enforcement.
are there grants from the agencies to support this water quality work?
There are multiple grants from the agency for water quality. It does not come from the permit fee. It comes from separate appropriations. There's a capital assistance, capital equipment assistance program. There's a BMP program with state wetlands conservation or buffer conservation. So there are multiple grant programs that the agency administers and has administered for years.
Senator Watson?
Thank you. So LFO is large farm operation and MFO is medium. Okay. Thank you. Just want to make sure.
And so what is the relationship between the permit managing water on the farm and that water once it leaves the farm and now it's entering the municipality in some way or another?
Well, remember that first authority that municipalities have, the bylaw that any municipality may adopt bylaws to implement stormwater management and control consistent with the program developed by A&R pursuant to 10 VSA 1264. The 1264 says secretary cannot regulate stormwater runoff from farms that are in compliance with the agricultural practice. So the municipality is already supposed to be limited both by the limitation on the bylaw and by the authority granted to A&R under 1264. They're not supposed to be regulating agricultural stormwater, but they do have an argument. And their argument is that they're a utility, right? Because under Title 24 and the authority for municipalities to set up sewer districts or consolidated sewer districts or sewer authorities, there's 3 different chapters. Sewage is defined as stormwater. And then municipalities are authorized to assess rates for sewage/stormwater. But under 2 of those chapters, they're required to call those rates sewage disposal rates. You do not call the fee that's assessed for stormwater sewage disposal rates. It's called stormwater fee. So they do have an argument that they're a utility. And they're arguing, at least in Senate Finance, that the fees should be assessed on farms for equity. There's no equity. There's no way that you look at this and say that there's equity. So farms, if you don't assess on the farm because they're exempt under Title 24 and under the authority of 1264, there's no equity. If you do assess on the farm because the municipality is a utility, there's no equity because the farm is already paying for its agriculture stormwater. And so it will be paying more than any one other property in the town for its stormwater.
For a non-farm property, a municipality with an MS4, are there other fees related to water quality that property might pay that beyond the utility fee to the
If they
MS4?
were going to develop the property, they would pay a fee to A&R and potentially to the municipality as well. Redevelop, develop, expand.
Like water, but I mean, related to water quality, there permits. I'm just trying to see if there's basically sort of an RAP equivalent to the MFO and LFO fees you were citing. They could happen to a non-farm property that also will, and they'll not only end up paying that fee like the farm, but they'll also end up paying a fee to the utility.
Sure. So they wouldn't be paying it to the utility. There are state and federal requirements. If you're a certain type of industry, you need the multi-sector general permit, a stormwater permit. If you're discharging to state water, you need a discharge permit. If you are constructing, which is actually a permit that applies to farm, if you're going to disturb land for the purpose of constructing a structure, farm has to pay that. Developer, property owner has to pay it as well. So there are other permits and requirements that could apply to both the non-farm and the farm.
And are any of those permits related to a non-point discharge? So that we're, enacting sort of stormwater in the making.
The multi-sector general permit is the stormwater permit. And it requires certain classified industries to implement stormwater management measures.
And I don't know if you have more of your presentation.
I do, because the primary component of statutory construction is the guidance or rules that courts use when they interpret statute. And so the primary goal of statutory construction is to give effect to the legislature's intent. And there are many rules for that statutory construction and finding the legislature's intent. But you can never use one of those tools to result in something that's inconsistent with intent. Sections 8 and 9 of S-115 were supposed to clarify the intent of the legislature, clarify that provision that says stormwater bylaws have to be consistent with the A&R authority under 1264, meaning that they cannot regulate required agricultural practices. But it's up to you to put in whatever clarifying language that you want to provide. The language in S-115 section 8, it could change, it could be clearer. You could change it, you could remove it, you could leave the ambiguity between farms are exempt from municipal regulation or farms are part of a stormwater utility. But if you would ask me what the statutes say, I think the weight of the statutes in both the municipal bylaw authority and in 10 VSA 1264 indicate that required agricultural practices are not supposed to be regulated by a municipality. So a farm is not supposed to be regulated if it's building a structure by the municipality. And I think everyone's clear on that. A farm can build its own structure and the municipality does not regulate. But the municipality is saying, once that structure is built, they can assess $1,000 fee. I don't know if that's your intent. I can't speak to legislative intent. It's not my role. But
And can, just to look at the word regulate. So I think when we were in finance, we heard some back and forth over whether or not assessing a fee was actually regulating. You know, it was a fee for service, handling stormwater that left a farm property, as opposed to regulating the activities on the farm itself. Can you help us figure out to what degree we're consistent or inconsistent when we say that fees are not regulation? They are, in essence, a cost associated with providing a service. And I guess the service would be that stormwater, having left the farm, becomes part of a larger system that the municipality has to manage when it gets from the ditch to the stream to the river, whatever. I mean, they have an obligation to manage stormwater in a manner consistent with other statutes under A&R. That the water quality provisions, statutory obligations that towns must meet in terms of performance.
yeah, but I have multiple thoughts here. I consider a fee or a tax to be a regulation, because if you don't pay it, there are regulatory consequences, including your property can be seized. So I consider that regulatory.
Okay.
I do think that there is something of an argument that the stormwater that leaves the farm is part of the utility, and that's the service that the utility is paying a fee for. But how much of that stormwater off the state road goes on to the farm? There are multiple instances where farm fields get flooded from stormwater off of roads. Does the farm get to offset its payment for the stormwater that runs off its farm to the stormwater that runs onto its farm? I mean, I think that's a policy decision. You have to make a policy decision of whether or not the municipality, the utility, gets to regulate farming, or it just is not authorized to, because it already is regulated under the RAPs or the MFO or LFO. And there is no equity. There's no equity however you want.
Senator Watson and Senator White.
Thank you. So the fees that are associated with the LFO and the MFO, so those are paid to the state.
They pay to the state.
And what happens to that money?
That money goes into the Agricultural Water Quality Assistance Fund for ag water quality activities at the Agency of Ag, most notably for employee salaries.
Okay. And so none of that money makes it back to a municipality that would otherwise be needing to manage stormwater runoff.
No, it doesn't. And that's largely because the cost of a farm's managed stormwater runoff are, so let me step back. The agency needs those staff people and the funds for those staff people because farms have requirements that far exceed municipal requirements. And they have to go out and enforce them. And they also have to finance those activities because the cost to the farm to comply with the RAPs and the MFO and LFO far exceed the $1,500 or $2,500 a year because they have to do a ton of stuff in order to comply with the RAPs and the MFO and the LFO.
Okay, and if I can keep going here. So to what, I feel like I should be more familiar with MS4s than I am. I mean, I'm relatively familiar with them, but to what degree is a municipality held responsible for water quality that might be negatively impacted by a farm? Does my question make sense?
It does.
Like financially,
So the MS4s, I've got to go back in time. So when I first started here, the big issue was stormwater impairment of multiple rivers and water segments in the state. And there was tons of litigation, tons of legislation, tons of regulation. And the way that it ultimately was resolved is that those communities, municipalities that had one of the stormwater impaired waters, almost all of them, were designated MS4s. Because an MS4 designation is usually a federal designation based on your population size and your neighboring populations.
And who does that designating?
Well, normally it's just under the Clean Water Act. If you hit one of those thresholds, you're an MS4.
So you're in.
You're in. But a state can also exercise what's called its residual designation authority to designate towns with contributions that are significant as MS4. It's called a residual designation authority. It's not just an MS4. They can designate you a discharger or whatever.
And do we have both in Vermont? The ANR is designated some.
Yes.
And federal laws automatically.
Yeah, so there's really only one federally designated, it's Burlington. Although, no, that's not true. That's originally how it was, but then the MS4 threshold went down. I'd have to look to see which are federally and which come under it. But it really doesn't matter because once the agency said the MS4 is going to cover all those stormwater impaired waters and all those in those municipalities, that became the standard. They have to maintain that MS4 permit in order to meet the TMDL requirements for the stormwater impaired waters. Right, that's how the TMDL was met for stormwater impaired waters. Because the MS4 is supposed to have a flow component in it, which is, I'm going too far afield. But and
You may want to say what TMDL is for the.
right, the total maximum daily load is when a water is impaired, the Federal Clean Water Act requires the state to come up with a plan that will lead to the the elimination of that impairment so that the water can be used for its traditional uses. And so in the stormwater water impaired waters, what happens is that flow creates impairment. It's usually it creates aquatic biota loss. It can create aesthetic issues. It can create turbidity. It can create loss of recreational or fishing access. So it can really, flow can really mess up the traditional uses of the water. And then the TMDL is your goal for getting back to a non-impaired water. And then as part of a TMDL, you have to have an implementation plan. The TMDL is your destination, the implementation is your map to get there. And so the MS4 is both. It is both the target for reducing flow in the impaired waters, but it is also how to do that through multiple practices that are required federally and additional provisions under state law.
When you say flow, does that also include, so are we only talking water volume, or are we also talking what's in the water, like phosphorus?
Well, the real impairment is the movement of the water, how fast it moves, where it moves, etc. But that's hard to measure because of just the volatility of rainfall, snow melt, etc. So what the state uses as a surrogate is sediment, which can be measured to a point. And then you just have to kind of make it up. And then so that's why we use sediment, because you can measure it up to like, it used to be 80%, is higher than 80% now. I can't remember what the percentage is now.
And all right, so we can, another whole subject, like what's in the sediment. But let's keep going. It's flow that's driving the activity.
Right. So just on that last point, you can't measure a lot of the other stuff that's in the runoff unless you know what you're measuring for. So back to the MS4, back to the question, is there a financial liability to the municipality if they somehow don't regulate ag water quality? I think technically no. I think technically if they continue to manage according to the MS4 permit, do what they're supposed to do under the MS4 permit, they won't incur any liability. Because the municipality doesn't really go onto the farm and say, this is what you need to do, farm, this is how we're going to regulate you, unless the farm somehow triggers redevelopment or one of those provisions. Most of the time, the farm activity is not going to be subject to municipal regulation. So and the financial liability would be the municipality is not doing what it's supposed to do. But if they continue to do what they're required to do under the MS4, I don't think they'll incur financial liability. If they stop doing that, then yeah, they're going to be subject to penalties.
So just a little nuance in this question. If there were hypothetically a farm that contributed, because they're large, a large, there was a lot of discharge, non-point discharge from that farm, made it into the system that is the MS4, part of the MS4. And the flow was increased in a significant way because of it. Could the municipality sort of quote unquote fail as an MS4 because it wasn't able to adequately manage that flow? They would now have inadvertently contributed to an impairment of the water.
So remember that what municipalities regulate, when they regulate stormwater, they regulate impervious surface. Most impervious surface on a farm is in its production area. Where the barns are, where the farm is, where the sheds are for the equipment, where your cattle lot is, where your feed lot, your bunker silo. And that's important because under the Federal Clean Water Act, anything that comes off of that into a water, that's a direct discharge from a point source. Because the Federal Clean Water Act defines a point source as a pipe, a ditch, a conveyance, a farm, except for agricultural stormwater discharge. Tidal drains.
Tile drains. It's water, it's coming out of a pipe, but it's not a pipe. And it's not a discharge.
That's unresolved. Unresolved. There are cases which say yes, there are cases that say no.
Okay, so thank you. Senator White, you've been patiently holding a question.
Thank you, Senator Bright. So this is all a new thing to me.
Yeah.
And I appreciate when you describe the acronyms, and I'm very much trying to follow along and keep pace. I just want to fully understand our role as a committee, and then I do have a question, which is, this is a bill that is not in our possession.
Finance.
It's in finance's possession, so we can't do anything to this bill except as individuals to amend it. Is that correct?
We could do it right as individuals to amend. We could bring an amendment.
Okay.
That would be sort of our de facto committee reports on S-115.
Okay.
With our possession, or we could make a recommendation back to finance. I'm not sure which.
Okay.
It got pushed to us because this conversation reveals how far away from just a financial question
Yes.
it is.
Mhm.
And so that's why we're
Okay.
digging into it, or at least teeing it up today. That bill will be in there through the end of the week because it wants to make crossover. So we're jumping in to get a little start today to get the ball rolling. We'll have to figure out as a committee how much more time we allocate to digging into this.
Okay, so we would, rather than be looking at language, we would be making a recommendation to the finance committee
Or bringing an amendment.
or bringing an amendment. Okay, so my main concern is around a municipality's cost if we're exempting farms. And when we say municipality, I just want to understand the description that you're giving of a utility. You're kind of telling us that a municipality, when acting as a utility, may be different than how they are as acting as a municipality. Is that what you were starting to describe at the beginning? Because so in the St. Albans example, which seems to be kind of the crux of what we're talking about, I'm concerned that all of the costs will be then falling upon residential homeowners compared to a large, like the burden of that cost under that utility. So is what you're saying, you're not sure if them acting as a utility gives them more authority, or, yeah, I guess I need, and that's kind of my bright line, is I want to make sure that the municipality is not shouldering a cost for residential homeowners.
Right, it's a good question, and I do think under the bylaw authority, that the municipality really doesn't have an argument that they can regulate required agricultural practices. I think their argument is that if they're a stormwater utility, then they get to charge for rates for effectively the use of the utility, and all the services that the utility provides, especially in an MS-14. And so the boundaries of those utilities are generally the same boundaries as a municipality. It may be a slightly different governance structure depending on if they have adopted it as, their board of sewer authority, et cetera, board of water authority, but it's effectively municipality. Will the town, if farms are exempted, the 83 farms in the municipalities that are assessing these fees, if they are accepted, will the cost increase for other property owners? Yes.
Yeah.
So all other properties with impervious surface in these municipalities are assessed already. Most are used, because most properties are residential, most use what's called the equivalent residential unit, which is it's just a device to figure out a kind of a surrogate payment for residential properties. It's supposed to reflect kind of like the average impervious surface on a lot. That equivalent residential unit could change.
See,
So-
that's my main concern. Yeah.
Thank you for that helpful question and answer. And although, I just want to make sure I also have it clear. So although there's the point and non-point water, so leaves any, well, leaves a farm. The utility can only be assessing based on impervious surface, and then that is going to be of course, a direct discharge if that water leaves. But what happens out on the fields, if there's non-point source, that's not one that's off the table for consideration.
So, right, if it runs out the production area and it goes into the water, that's a direct discharge, and that's regulated by ANR. And that is prohibited from happening under the RAPs. It's not supposed to happen. If it's outside the production area, there's what's called the agricultural stormwater exemption. That took about 4 years for attorneys nationally to figure out what the heck that meant. And it's a case out of the Second Circuit Waterkeeper Alliance that basically said if the farm is applying nutrients outside of the production area in a manner consistent with agronomic rates, tailored to site-specific conditions, and it rains, and those nutrients run off into the adjacent water, that is not a discharge. That is the agricultural stormwater exemption. So what farms need to do to meet that is implement a nutrient management plan, which is a tool for applying nutrients according to site-specific conditions and rates. And all farms in the state are required to have a nutrient management plan.
So, thank you so much. I know that we will have more questions. I think what I'd like to do is just, Senator McDonald, we're gonna go to the lightning round of initial testimony from other parties.
What about farmland?
What about what?
Farmland, the agricultural land is ditched. And the waters, when it rains heavily, the ditches fill up and it goes downstream and overflows town roads and town bridges, class 3 roads.
Well, I mean, that is stormwater. And it doesn't really matter if it's off a farm or if it's off any other property. I mean, it will have an effect, and the town has to regulate those ditches according to the municipal roads permit.
Or throw up the road.
Or throw up the road. I mean, the municipality has the requirements for municipal roads under the municipal roads permit that they have. That is where that lies. The ditch, now if the ditch was, the pollutant in the ditch was a pollutant other than something that qualified for ag stormwater discharge, like you pour gasoline into the ditch and then that went in downstream into water, that's a direct discharge.
I was thinking of this specific case where increased number of downbursts routinely beginnings across town roads. Over
which is what the municipal roads general permit is supposed to be addressing in farming.
So let's, I know there's more. Thank you, Mr. O'Grady. Thank you, committee, for all the good questions. I would like to just ask, we have 4 witnesses. We have 12 minutes. That's for like a 2-minute just statement of what your issue, what your interest is in this work. So we'll just know what the parties are thinking. Obviously, we'll need more time to come back and dig into it. But I would just like the committee to have a sense of the range of thinking of interested parties on the question. And with that, Mr. Pash, I'm going to ask you to be super brief, that 2-minute window, just say where ag is on this, and we will come back to it. But
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Bray. For the record, Ryan Patch with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. The agency has raised this topic for discussion because we think it is pretty cut and dry. This committee would have dealt seriously with Act 64 2015, as well as the Clean Water Service Provider model, which clearly sets out the sectoral requirements for clean water, for which agriculture has its own regulatory framework. Mr. O'Grady summarized the 2 existing exemptions in law, both under Title 10 for stormwater and Title 24 for municipalities. So it's arguable that these fees never should be collected from farms, and that farmers have their own more stringent requirements that they must meet. Otherwise, that state inspection and enforcement mechanism is there to ensure compliance with the state water quality standards. So I'm very brief and talk about why there is a separate regulatory framework for stormwater on farms. And it's because there exists a required agricultural practices. Section 601 is the RAPs that promulgates the requirements for discharges. I'm just going to read them briefly. Farms shall not create any discharge of agricultural waste to surface waters of the state through a discrete conveyance such as, but not limited to, a pipe, ditch, or conduit without a permit from the Secretary of A&R. If you're going to discharge, you need a permit from A&R, you need a CAFO permit. We currently have no issue CAFO permits in the state of Vermont. 601B, production areas, barnyards, animal holding or feedlot areas. That part of the barn where the production happens, where municipalities are assessing stormwater utility user fees based on the town's mapping of impervious surface on those farms. The requirements for farms from the Agency of Agriculture states production areas, barnyards, animal holding or feedlot areas, manure storage areas, and feed storage shall utilize runoff and leachate collection systems, diversion, or other management strategies in order to prevent the discharge of agricultural waste to surface water or groundwater. Farms cannot have their production areas running into ditches, running into drop inlets. That would be an arguable direct discharge point source, and that would come under ANR's regulations. So the RAPs exist because those types of discharges are not allowed, and we respond to all complaints and inspect MFO, LFO, and CSFO farms regularly. To talk about
so I think we're going to need to call time, but you've laid out what that's helpful. So I don't mean to frustrate anyone. We just need to keep going. You want a 10-second
10 seconds
extension?
Right, the stormwater utility user fee, farms are paying into that. A payer should be able to benefit. The stormwater manual does not include agricultural BMPs. If a municipality was to install a stormwater practice on a farm, it would make them non-compliant with the RAPs. They are paying for a program they cannot benefit from currently. And so taking those 2 existing exemptions and the fact that stormwater is regulated differently for agriculture than it is for every other entity is why we are asking for the change to the bill. So thank you for your time.
It was a long 10 seconds. Senator McDonald.
Just, you mentioned pipes, ditches, and something else.
Okay, we're gonna
Conduits.
Conduits, and so what was for tile drains? Where do they fit
Yeah,
into your
okay.
testimony?
they're not.
No comment.
Tomorrow.
We'll have to come back to that. That is like a big topic. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for jumping in and out. With that, I'd like to go to Ms. Dougherty, who's on the big screen up there. If you could do the same approximately 2-minute drill, we know we need to learn more, but if you could just help us understand where the Green Mountain Water Environmental Associates are on this.
Yes, thank you, Sharon Bray. I appreciate the opportunity. Just a couple quick points here. You've heard a lot of great testimony today. I do want to clarify that these utilities, they are not in place to regulate the activities on the farm. I don't believe that's the intention of the MS4 utility programs, is to regulate those activities, but rather it's to, to distribute the obligations of meeting the MS4 permit requirements that the communities are faced to meet. It comes as a surprise that there's a belief that farms don't have any benefits from these programs. They do help keep protect the infrastructure of our roads, our waterways. They transport water off the road safely and continue to allow safe passage through the community, while also improving overall water quality for the community, which is a benefit. So to say that they don't receive any benefit would suggest that they're not part of the community, which is a concern. I also want to add to that there's some concerns that the farms are paying double times, once for their activities with the state permits, and then once again to the utility fees. I'll make note, ask any MS4 how many permitted operators they have for community developments, residential community developments. A lot of those newer communities have stormwater treatment practices as part of their community, as required by the ANR. And they also continue to pay utility fees to the local MS4 because this is a community-wide benefit, a community-wide effort to meet the water quality standards that are being put in place. The intention is not to, regulate or dictate or tell the farmers how to do their job. It's a matter of making sure that the community has the resources to meet the state obligations. I'd also add that there was a question about where the funds go from the farm to the state, and that funding was needed to support the employees and the activities at the state agency. The same could be said about the utility programs. When you ask a municipality to really implement the MS4 program, that is a very significant lift. There's a lot of activities associated with it. There are staffing needs that are required with it. I know we do have someone here today that will be giving testimony on behalf of a local MS4 who can speak to those cost burdens more directly. And so I will allow them to do that. So I do hope that in summary, I understand I'm 2 minutes here. This is not about regulating the farm's activities. This is about looking at the opportunities and finding ways to be able to collect the revenues needed to be able to implement a program to meet our state charges in the MS4 permit program, to clean up the water quality, to provide safe passage roads and infrastructure, and to maintain those to the best of our ability. And I think that's something that is a community-wide effort, and hopefully the farmers see themselves as part of the community that they're located in. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, so thank you again. I know it's a little frustrating to be in the 2-minute drill zone, but
Okay,
we will
I understand.
speak back. But this is to help us sense what the range of thinking out there is. And to you and Mr. Patch, as well as Mr. Zwicky, Mr. Wheeler, I would say what would be very helpful, I'm thinking on the fly with you here, is if you could, in writing, sort of state your position and send it to the committee, so that we can read that before we come back to it. You'll help us make more rapid progress because we are in a short crossover week and we're trying to do our due diligence. At the same time, we know we have very limited time. Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to go to Mr. Zwicky.
Chair, I'm going to start my 2-minute timer now. Dylan Zwicky with Leonine Public Affairs here on behalf of the town of St. Albans. We'll just echo the remarks from the previous witness. We share her perspective. The town of St. Albans is an MS4 community. We estimate our obligations between now and 2036 to be roughly $16 million, $16 million in investments, stormwater upgrades, and infrastructure. For perspective, the town of St. Albans spends more on stormwater than they do on their municipal roads. So that's quite a significant investment for the town. The hit, if agriculture were to be exempted, would be roughly 80,000 of about 500,000 collected annually. So that is not insignificant. And as Senator White identified, that would fall on the backs of residential, commercial, and every other taxpayer or parcel owner in the town, including those that are tax exempt. The municipality pays the stormwater utility fee on its properties. Churches, other exempt entities pay on that. It is an all-in approach, and we believe that it should be maintained as such. And we, I think, disagree with the agency's interpretation that there is no impact to the town's stormwater obligations under their MS4 permit because of the RIPs, as it was identified in some earlier testimony, that the RIPs do not cover the flow restoration that the town is required to solve for as part of their MS4. And so don't feel like they're all out. And I will just end by saying, as part of the stormwater utility setup, the town has a credit manual for certain entities to be able to lower their obligations. This is the one-page form that anyone regulated under an RIP, so any agricultural parcel, can fill out this one-page form. It's pretty simple, and they get a 35% credit to account for their work under the RIP, and at 154. So happy to provide writing.
Great, thank you so much. We'll look forward to the written version to help expand. Just like a football game, a lot can happen in 2 minutes. It can be a boring game in the last 2 minutes. People score
We're in
three-
basketball season
People,
now.
yeah, or, right, people score 3 times. Okay, so with that, we're on to Mr. Wheeler. If you can do the 2-minute drill with us.
Yes.
We will come back, and if you can send written testimony that explains this in more detail, that'll help us have a deeper conversation the next time we come back.
Yep.
But where is South Burlington at the moment on this issue?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing that jumped out to me when reading this language is there are multiple unintended consequences of the language as currently written. None of those were really addressed today, so I don't want to get into it now in the 2-minute drill, but there are issues where others would be exempt as well, potentially, based off of using the term exempt practices. Also, the use of the word operating fee. We don't charge operating fees, we charge utility fees. And then even if you take the first portion, provided the municipality does not exceed the secretary's authority, there's a lot of talk early on about how municipalities can adopt zoning bylaws that exceed the secretary's authority. But under our MS4 permit, there's actually language in minimum control measure 5 that requires that we do just that we exceed the secretary's authority. There's a whole section, section F here that says, and for stormwater runoff, discharges from new development, blah, 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 that are not subject to regulation under the agency's post-construction stormwater management program, the permittee shall adopt an ordinance, planning, zoning, and subdivision regulation, basically requiring stormwater treatment for those entities. So we're already required to put in zoning bylaws that are more strict than the secretary. And then, I just want to clarify that we're not regulating what they do in the fields or what they do with manure or the animals. We're really just focused on the impervious surfaces. And then there's the water quality treatment standards, groundwater recharge, channel protection, and then extreme flood. And, I think we'd be willing to negotiate where, required agricultural practices get some sort of credit on utility fees to address the fact they are dealing with the water quality component. And even we offer a non-structural credit, which is kind of maintaining those grass buffer areas. But RAPs don't really address channel protection and extreme flooding. So, I think we would propose that they are still assessed the fees, but then perhaps you all could make the decision that they should just be automatically awarded a credit, or municipalities can make that decision on a local level. And just for further history, VTrans tried to get an exemption in the past as well, and they ended up getting a 35% credit. And that's under 24 VSA section 3615C. So perhaps, there should be an amendment to that language proposed rather than going after our local bylaws.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll look forward to your written testimony. Do you, is there any entity, person that can speak on, and maybe Green Mountain Water Environmental Associates does that, I don't, can speak on behalf of all the MS4s. You have like an association, is there someone that could give a consensus position of the municipalities that have MS4s?
We could certainly reach out via email.
I was gonna say, not on a state level, but we do in Chittenden County have a committee of the MS4s that do get together and discuss and meeting some of our minimum requirements. That's managed through Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. So I can reach out to them and see if they would be able to step in and provide some, some assistance and give you what you're looking for.
Okay, great. If you could, maybe in the memo you'll send, if you tell us who it is and contact information, that would help us follow up. All right.
Absolutely.
So, all right, thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Thank you, our witnesses. Thank you, committee, for staying over a little extra. I'm sorry. When the 2 minutes go, we need another little bit fiscal impacts to the state. So if you could join us at the table for a moment. Thank you. Mr. Barnett.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Ted Barnett, for the record, Ted Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office. No problem, just really coming in to say that we at JFO don't really take a look at municipal revenues, and since this is primarily an action that's happening at the municipal level, we don't forecast any sort of revenue impact from the state as a result of changes or considerations in section 8.
Okay. Well, thank you for your super.
You're the only one who stayed up there.
Yeah, thank you for your incredible patience to listen to all these things that don't have an impact on what you're analyzing. So
I learned a lot.
okay. So thank you, everyone. We will figure out our path forward here by Friday.